Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
Alyeska Pipeline Service Company, fueling philanthropic programs and dedicated to creating educational and professional opportunities for Alaska Native people.
The National Weather Service.
Good Wednesday, everyone. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with the National Weather Service. It's the 2nd of November, and as always, we encourage you to stay up to date with your local weather information in your part of Alaska. You can do that easily by giving us a call on the Alaska Weather Information Line, 1-800-472-0391. You can find us on the web at weather.gov/Alaska, as well as localizing your weather experience by going to weather.gov/Fairbanks/Anchorage or /Juneau. You can always tweet to us at any of our National Weather Service accounts there, and we'll get an answer back to you. We'd love to see your pictures as you tag us on Facebook or just submit those through Twitter as well. NWS Fairbanks has an Instagram account if you haven't found that yet. It is called NWS Fairbanks, and they share some wonderful pictures there from the interior anytime. And you can always send us an email if you need some help finding something on any of the websites or your social media experience there. You'd love to send us a picture, or you just want to ask us a weather question in private, you can certainly do that at nws.ar.tvweather@noaa.gov. Now, on to the show times. As always, just want to remind folks that the AKwx system is still showing Alaska weather at 5:30. You can find it on KUAC 9.4 UAF TV, also live at 5:30, 360 North, 7 days a week now, and thanks to them for sharing that on Sunday, 7:30 p.m. each night. In the morning, you can find Alaska Public Media. Wake up with us at 5 o'clock in the morning, same broadcast there, and on YouTube by looking for AKwx TV in the search bar, or you can find it from weather.gov/Alaska just by looking at the TV weather desk page there. You'll be able to find a link from that site. On to the weather at hand. High wind warnings are in effect. They'll go from about 1 o'clock in the morning until 7 a.m. tomorrow for the southern outer coast of southeast Alaska. That doesn't look like a whole lot of territory here on this map, but it does include places like Heidelberg and Craig, and we're concerned about the winds coming up steady from the southeast at 40 miles per hour with gusts reaching 65 miles per hour. So the winds are going to come up tonight, and they'll reach a point tonight before midnight probably at their peak, before they start to settle down as we get into the early morning hours tomorrow. So watch for those winds to come up. If you're sleeping tonight, it's probably going to get loud. A good thing to do tonight, immediately following this broadcast, would be make sure you look outside. Make sure everything is either tied down or brought in. Boats should be moored pretty well, as conditions like this are certainly ones that will put things into kind of rough and tumble mode there. So the strongest winds will be tonight. Things will settle down as we get into the morning hours tomorrow. Again, southeast winds up to 40 miles per hour sustained, but the gusts will be the problem at 65 miles per hour or higher, and that does include places like Heidelberg and Craig. In the meantime, after we ended the show last night, things continue to cool down in Barrow. But the interesting thing was, though, it was still pretty warm. Take a look at this. Record heat was in Barrow. Now, we're not talking about the high temperature. That was 31 degrees. That was not a new record. But the low temperature was one of the warmest. In fact, the warmest low temperature for November the 2nd. The average low temperature in Barrow this time of the year is 7. It was 26 degrees yesterday. So, wow, pretty warm stuff there. And obviously, different things are happening because of that. Snowfall, 0.2 inches there was reported yesterday again, so it was warm, it snowed, and it was a record level of heat there in the morning at 26 degrees. Wild stuff. Here's a look at the satellite picture now, and several waves of low pressure are working up the chain from southeast to north and west. The jet stream carving out a path from the eastern Gulf all the way across southwestern Alaska and across the Gulf of Anadyr and into the Arctic. On the other side of that is very stable air. High pressure is working southward. It is allowing more and more cold air to continue working its way southward, and because of that, places like Fairbanks will probably have a better chance of seeing some snow as we go into the next couple days, maybe as early as tonight and tomorrow. As you look out to the west, you can see a lot of cold air coming in behind this wave of low pressure there. The speckled clouds indicate that cold air aloft. So certainly some cold enough air to produce snow and mixed precipitation across the chain in the next couple days. You'll see that on the surface chart in just a bit. And of course, across southeast, we have a powerful low working its way northward. This is what's bringing in the winds to the southern outer coast, as well as a large part of southeastern Alaska in the coming days. There will be some blustery weather across the central sections of southeast and working its way northward. But the strongest winds right now look to be across the southern outer coast again, with gusts up to 65 miles per hour. So once again, folks in Heidelberg and Craig will likely have some of the stronger wind gusts. But you will see higher seas and strong gusts inside of Clarence Strait, as well as places like Ketchikan and working their way up toward Petersburg. So be prepared for changing weather there. Here's a look at the surface chart, and you can see the low now at 969 millibars. It's working a frontal boundary across British Columbia and Haida Gwaii. As that continues working northward, that pressure gradient has been tightening up. And as you know, when that happens there, the winds really start to pick up. So conditions will be changing as we get ahead into the nighttime hours and early tomorrow morning, with that high wind warning beginning around 1 o'clock when winds reach that level that damage could start to occur. Clouds are spreading northward into the northern Gulf of Alaska as well. Periods of light rain have been seen across Seward all the way down to the southern tip of the Kenai Peninsula. Low pressure is developing north of the Alaska range, with high pressure out across the central Yukon at 1,012 millibars. This is gathering cold air, and more of that is trying to work its way southward. Right now, a boundary lingering just north of the Brooks Range is holding a lot of that back, but everything you see up here is at least significantly colder than what we're dealing with across the interior, and certainly down to the south. So it is trying as hard as it can to ease into Alaska. Across the west, wave of low pressure there just west of the southern tip of the Alaska Peninsula and north of Unalaska and Dutch Harbor. That's at 983 millibars. Some pockets of rain with that. Otherwise, just generally unsettled across the Bering Sea, which is really nothing new. But 981 millibar low out to the west. That's going to grab some colder air and start moving southward. So we can change this over to a cold front. The triangles point the direction of travel, and of course that's moving southward as it would this time of year. Periods of rain and snow showers working across the southern Bering. Rain showers across the west coast. In fact, as far north as the Bering Strait, so still plenty of warm air there. Periods of light snow develop across the middle Tanana Valley, as well as the central and middle Yukon Valley and the upper Tanana Valley there. Most of that should be fairly light. Periods of freezing rain or freezing drizzle across the North Slope. Again, a factor of that warmer air, and fog should be noted across the North Slope later today. Low pressure is working its way up the eastern Gulf. That drops to 974, and with that, pressure gradient should be pretty tight, and winds will roar across the southern outer coast there with gusts up to 65 miles per hour. That should gradually diminish as we go through the early morning hours, and you'll notice some improvements in the wind shifting around throughout the day across southeastern Alaska. Maybe some snow up across the higher terrain. Across the interior, periods of light snow passing through the middle Tanana Valley, Fairbanks, and North Pole. And watch for freezing drizzle to continue around Kaktovik, with light snow possible around Barrow and the Chukchi Coast. Rain showers across the southwest, and for the central and western chain, periods of rain and snow possible there, while things remain fairly dry for south central. Look for that to continue into Friday. For southeast, still unsettled, with another frontal boundary organizing and working inland. As that happens, it may squeeze out more snow for the higher terrain. Rain and wind continues for southeast. Dry conditions again for south central, southwest. Periods of rain showers across the southern Bering and Bristol Bay, with some light snow possible across the interior, just outside of Bethel it looks like. And snow showers will be possible for the interior and the northwestern coast as we get into Friday, with windier conditions there across the upper Tanana and upper Yukon valleys, as you can see with the pressure gradient tightening there. So watch for some turbulence in that region. As we look at current temperatures today, another mild one for southeast, 40s and 50s there. Hyder was 45, Sitka about the same. Capital City in the lower 40s there, with Haines and Skagway a little bit on the cooler side. 45 as you get into Cross Sound, and Yakutat was 48. 43 in Cordova, upper 30s for Valdez this afternoon. 36 in Anchorage, 44 in Homer. 41 for Talkeetna, it was only 22 in Fairbanks. 32 in Eagle, teens for Northway. Fort Greely saw 25. Fort Yukon was 10 degrees, 11 in Arctic Village, and the North Slope saw temperatures in the 20s and 30s, with Barrow at 30 degrees. Prudhoe Bay and Dead Horse in the upper 20s, about the same there for Wainwright. Into Kotzebue Sound, 20s and 30s were reported from Kivalina to Shishmaref, 35 around Nome, and 40 in St. Lawrence Island. Unalakleet was 36 degrees today, 31 in McGrath, 39 in Bethel. Southwest saw temperatures in the 30s and 40s, with King Salmon at 42, Sandpoint at 45, Cold Bay and False Pass also in the low to mid 40s today. St. Paul and St. George in the mid to upper 30s, with St. Paul considerably warmer there. 41 around Unalaska and Dutch Harbor, and mid to upper 30s for the central and western chain. Overnight low temperatures will drop into the single digits and teens, but again, this is not that cold. Teens and 20s for the North Slope, which is even more not cold for the average conditions there this time of the year, as we just saw. 26 degrees in Unalaska, or Unalakleet, 20s and 30s for Southwest. Nunivak Island, 36, 34 in Kodiak, 30s for the Alaska Peninsula, the Pribilofs, and the Aleutians. With high temperatures tomorrow, back in the teens and 20s, and once again in the mid-20s for the North Slope. Kotzebue Sound at or even above freezing for the daytime tomorrow. Mid-30s for Norton Sound, Southwest in the 30s and 40s, Kodiak 46, South Central in the mid to upper 30s for the afternoon, 40s and even lower 50s for central and southern parts of Southeast, with Juneau holding in the mid-40s for your daytime temperatures. On to flying weather, and we're watching the red areas for IFR. You'll see that across the middle Yukon Valley and across the North Coast. Watch for IFR just offshore of the southern outer coast and along the mouth of the Yukon River for tomorrow morning. Watch as that moves northward tomorrow afternoon. But IFR will spread out across parts of southeast tomorrow, with MVFR and all the other remaining locations. IFR across the Beaufort and the Chukchi Coast for the afternoon. Your past conditions look like this. Anaktuvuk, we're expecting IFR to start with some improvements throughout the day. Expect similar conditions there for Adigan Pass, ending with MVFR. Lake Clark and Merrill Pass, we expect marginal conditions through a large part of the day. And for Rainy Pass, expect VFR conditions through most of the day. Same goes for Windy Pass. And for Isabel Pass, we expect to see visual flight rules through most of your afternoon. Mentasta Pass, look for MVFR as well as Tanita Pass starting at VFR and probably staying there. And as you get into Portage Pass, IFR to start, but improvements should be had during the day, and most of South Central will have pretty good flying visibility there. Chilkoot and White Pass expected to be IFR by day's end as that storm moves north. Colder air is taking over Alaska. You can see that working its way southward across British Columbia and Yukon as well. And 2,000-foot levels there aloft for southwestern Alaska, but dropping southward across our eastern locations. Icing potential will be hit and miss, but there is a little bit more to be had across the region tomorrow. Above 6,000 feet for a large part of southeastern Alaska and the passes there, and above 3,000 to 4,000 feet across many interior locations and the North Slope. For Southwest, expect light to isolated moderate across southwestern Alaska and the southern end of Kodiak Island, and hit and miss across the central Aleutians tomorrow above 3,000 feet. Here's a jet stream, and the main storm track has not changed very much. You can see those speeds running around 120 to 170 knots, slowing down as it moves into southeastern Alaska. But it's this action here that is creating a pretty good steering path for those low pressure systems to work up southeast and to encourage some stronger winds across the outer coast tomorrow and many other locations. We still have our blocking pattern in place, although it's shifting just enough to allow colder air to drop southward into the interior. And at 9,000 feet, we have high pressure sitting across the Seward Peninsula and Kotzebue Sound. That's allowing some of that colder air to drop southward right over the Beaufort Seacoast. With low pressure across the eastern Gulf, wind speeds are channeled in at 40, 55, even 70 knots further south of Panhandle. Low pressure is working its way into the Bering Sea with stronger winds across the central and western Aleutians. And at 3,000 feet, those winds are around 35 to 40 knots. Wind speeds are still fairly light across the interior from east to west, about 10 knots or so. But across the North Slope, they're stronger at 30 knots. Look for a south and westerly flow into the Panhandle with wind speeds much stronger around the Clarence Strait and outside of Haida Gwaii into the eastern Gulf up to 65 knots. So turbulence will indeed be watching southeast. Look for rapid improvements throughout the day, but occasional to even widespread moderate is likely below 4,000 feet. And don't be surprised for isolated severe across the southern outer coast and along the coastline itself during the afternoon. That could spread northward. Below 4,000 feet, watch for some chop on the North Slope. Across Prince William Sound, you'll hit some bumps, and the central and western Aleutians below 3,000 feet could reach occasional moderate during the day. That's a look at your aviation forecast. I'll be back with your marine weather here in just a few minutes.
Like most people, Dennis Beam and his daughter Kelly weren't worried about the cold the night their car slid into a ditch in the middle of a blizzard.
I wasn't really too concerned. I'd been stuck before and it wasn't all that deep. But the wind kept picking up and the storm just didn't let up. I was getting wet trying to get the car out, but it was no good, so I decided to wait. About 9 that morning, we'd been stuck about 4 hours. Storm wasn't stopping at all, and we were really getting cold. I figured nothing was going to happen up there on a country road. No help, period. So I decided to go for help. You stay warm and you stay in the car no matter what, okay?
Okay.
Everything's gonna be okay. I love you.
Love you too.
Okay, now, you be good. Right there. Right there, okay?
I didn't want to be left alone, but Dad said he'd be back for me. He promised.
Leaving Kelly was like leaving my heart behind, and I didn't know when I'd get it back. I couldn't see a thing. It was freezing. My eyes were frozen shut. I had ice all over my feet, but I had to keep going. There was nothing else to do.
Help! Please, this is Kelly Dean. We had a CB waiting in the car, so I tried to call for help. Help! But no one answered. I kept wondering where Daddy was. Can you hear me?
It took me 3 hours to get to a house, and it was literally my last ounce of energy. My feet were black, parts of my face were frozen, but that wasn't my main concern. Kelly was still in that car, and the police said they couldn't get to her until the storm stopped, and there was nothing I could do.
After it got dark, I didn't know what had happened. I couldn't stop thinking about Dad. I had 3 pieces of candy, but I wanted to save them for Dad because I thought he'd be hungry when he came back.
After 10 hours, I didn't know what to think. She'd been alone so long. There was a lot of worry time then. Yeah. A lot of thinking time. Kelly's okay. I think. I had to leave her in the car.
Sometimes in the car, I dream that Daddy might not come back.
About 1 the next morning, the storm broke, and the police headed off to get Kelly.
Have you heard anything?
Nothing yet. All I could think was that after 19 hours, who knows, she'd been there so long with no heat. I kept hoping I'd put enough emphasis on staying in that car until I got back.
When the rescuers came, I asked if Dad was okay. He said yeah. I was glad, because it was all over and Dad was okay.
It's for you?
Yes. Thank God. And then the call came. She was okay. My whole world lit up then. Oh, thank God. Thank you very much. Yes. Okay. She's okay.
Kelly suffered only mild symptoms of hypothermia. As the snow buried the car, it insulated and protected her from the severe cold and high wind. Dennis was badly frostbitten because of his walk through the snow. Which of the two had been in the most danger? Without a doubt, Dennis. As soon as he left the car, he put himself in tremendous jeopardy. Neither father or daughter were well prepared for the extreme weather conditions they encountered. A few carefully chosen items would have given them the extra margin of safety they needed. One blanket wasn't enough. Sleeping bags would have been better. Extra clothing would have been extremely welcome after Dennis got wet. Matches and candles. A flashlight with extra batteries. Signal flares. High-calorie, non-perishable food. A shovel and a sack of sand, ashes, or even kitty litter. And a first aid kit. These are examples of items you need. Winter travel is serious business, and you must be prepared for it. Your car should be in good working order. Know the route you plan to take, and tell somebody else where you're going and when you plan to arrive. Check the latest weather information before you leave. The National Weather Service provides up-to-the-minute weather forecasts and can predict most severe storms. If the people in our next story had listened to the weather forecast, they would be alive today. Traveling back to school, 2 students drove directly into a severe winter storm. They had a 4-wheel drive vehicle and were sure they could get through. First, they came upon a roadblock warning travelers to pull off the highway. They went around it. Several miles further, they got stuck in a large snowdrift directly under a bridge. They tried to dig out, but it was hopeless. Soaking wet, they changed clothes. Stuck in the snowdrift, isolated from help, they decided to sit it out. Wait until someone came along and found them. next morning, someone did. They were dead. They had made two fatal mistakes. One, traveling in the face of deteriorating weather conditions, and two, ignoring a police roadblock. Ironically, it appeared that after they got stuck, they did everything right. They started the car every so often to keep warm. They changed into dry clothing after getting wet trying to dig out. And they didn't abandon their car. However, stuck under the bridge, the wind trapped fatal carbon monoxide fumes around and inside the car. A freak accident? Maybe. But they really died because they didn't use common sense. After those first two mistakes, every other decision only compounded their danger. Ed and Paul Milewski, Dennis and Kelly Beam could have been winter storm fatalities. The two students were. Being prepared for winter emergencies will always better your odds in a snowstorm. So will using good judgment and common sense. These guidelines, if you get caught in a severe snowstorm, will help you survive the cold.
I think my sideburns got longer just watching that. Here's a look at the ice edge, and with strong easterly winds, we haven't seen a whole lot of ice development on the western coast or in the Chukchi coast. In fact, a lot of this is probably on the move and unstable at this point. However, along the Beaufort Sea coast, we are seeing a little more ice growth here that's expanding and building out, but it is not quite fast yet. So don't expect that this is stable just yet, but we can see some of the larger pieces of ice across the Beaufort Sea and the Arctic Ocean to the north, of course, moving along with that flow. So stronger easterly winds preventing a little bit more growth in some areas at this point. Let's look in southeast. Winds are coming up, as we know, tonight with a high wind warning from Heidelberg and down to Craig with gusts up to 65 miles per hour. This is a storm force low with 40s and 50-knot winds coming across the inner channels. Look for southeasterlies there with higher gusts throughout the morning. That should settle down a little bit more during the day. 13-foot seas expected there. Northerlies in the Lynn Canal opposing that at 30 knots with a 6-foot sea. Easterlies blowing out of Cross Sound. And across Gustavus at 45 knots with a 19-foot sea, and southeasterlies outside of Yakutat at 40 knots with a 16-foot sea. Conditions will improve on Friday, but it will not be entirely calm. Northerlies in the Lynn Canal across Stevens Passage and many areas in the central inner waters, 45 knots with a 5-foot sea, and southeasterlies inside of Clarence Strait with 14-foot seas there. Outer coast, you're looking at 30 to 35 knots with generally an offshore wind, southeasterlies for Craig and Heidelberg and the outer coast there. 20-foot seas diminishing to 12-foot seas as you move further northward with that easterly wind. For south central, light and variable winds in many areas, otherwise a gentle north and easterly wind, 10 to 15 knots. 4 to 5-foot seas across most of the north and western Gulf. Variable winds inside of Prince William Sound and Shelikof Strait. 6-foot seas east of Kodiak Island. As we get into Friday, a north and easterly wind that just doesn't seem to ramp up very much at all. Light and variable winds for most of the north and western Gulf. Inside of Cook Inlet, a gentle northerly breeze by and large. And east and northerlies, or northwesterlies I should say, east of Kodiak Island, 15 knots with a 7-foot sea. Bristol Bay, southeast wind at 15 knots with a 6-foot sea on Thursday, and for areas down the Bering Sea coast, a westerly wind up to 25 knots with a 10-foot sea, 7-foot seas for the Pacific coast. For Friday, you're looking at a southeasterly wind, still at 15 knots around Bristol Bay, a westerly flow down the Bering Sea coast, and northwesterlies in the lee of the Alaska Peninsula, 15 knots with a 7 to 8 foot sea. Westerlies will be coming up across the central and western chain for Thursday, up to 40 to 45 knots, 19 to 20 foot seas in some areas there. Light and variable winds changing around north of Unalaska to Nikolsky with a 10 foot sea. Westerlies around Unalaska, 15 knots with a 7 foot sea there. For Friday, we expect winds to diminish in all areas. You're still looking at a broad west and southwesterly flow for most of the central and western chain until you get out toward Kiska and Attu, and then that's a northeasterly wind out to the west with an 11 foot sea and 35 knot winds. For the west coast, easterlies moving across St. Lawrence Island and north of Nunivak Island to St. Matthew, 15 to 20 knots expected there with a 7 to 8 foot sea. Westerlies moving across the Pribilofs, 15 knots with an 8 foot sea on Friday. Expect winds to turn to more of a southwesterly direction and diminishing. 12 foot seas expected to reach the southwestern coast and becoming light. 4 foot seas expected by the afternoon. Across the northern Bering, we're still going out of the east, 15 to 20 there with a 4 to 7 foot sea. And for the North Slope, as we were talking about, easterly winds. The other factor with that is with the open water, we're still dealing with freezing spray, and some of that could be heavy. Watch the warnings there. And again, pay attention to your local weather information online or on your Marine Band radio. 8 to 9 foot seas are expected in just about all areas except for regions just outside of Kotzebue Sound. A slight turn to the north and east across the Chukchi Coast with freezing spray still an issue and moving out into the Chukchi Coast itself for Friday afternoon. Otherwise 20 to 25 in all areas. A quick recap of tonight's weather. We're watching a strong low, a storm force low in fact, across the eastern Gulf at 974 millibars. A high wind warning for the southern outer coast for Craig and Heidelberg. We expect winds to gust up to 65 miles per hour. Those winds will be coming up tonight. Watch for a generally clear night across south central with unsettled weather moving into the middle and central interior with a possibility of snow in Fairbanks.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.
Support comes from the University of Alaska College Savings Plan, helping you and your child save for college every step of the way, from diapers to diploma. More information at uacollegesavings.com.